Thank you. Brendan Geraghty from Geraghty Taylor Architects. We've come at this through an off-site manufacturing MMC approach where we created a house type, a very product-focused house type called Live and Home. It was scalable, it was very heavily standardized. We even formed a construction company to deliver it. And what we realized is actually it needed to be much more than that. The process of defining the product is just not enough. We did design the product. We also then found we had to design the supply chain and many other things as well. So we then went into the world of PRS, build to rent, and we were approached by a client who's a major player to take on some projects, but also to take on a design guide for them. And we realized in taking on this design guide, it wasn't just about the architecture. We had to move into all sorts of other areas of the project in terms of the marketing, the sales, the operational aspects, the FM aspects, and there was a much broader kind of cultural requirement rather than just the design. Coming out of that, we created our own brand for PRS, which is me, we, front, back, and we've used that as part of this. Now this design guide we created here has now been rolled out on 1,500 units in and around London at the moment, all of them under construction. We needed a rest after that, so we branded a beer and called it Idea Beer so we could move on from there. But what we started to understand is that we'd moved into a world of defining this project prior to defining the building. And for us, it became very simple to express it as the brand is everything about the ideas, about the culture of the ideas, that is not the architecture, that is not physical. Architecture has a history of great architects making statements which create attitudes towards design, but it's not really a brand, it's just a positioning. It helps makes design decisions, but it doesn't necessarily help to make all decisions. Last year or the year before, the RIBA came out with a very, very important report on the emerging client-architect relationship and where it could go into the future. And one of the main takeouts from that was that the architect needed to become the curator of the vision or regain their position as the curator of the vision. And we think that's a great thing, but we also think it's a limited thing because vision talks to strategy. But we think that strategy cannot exist on its own. Strategy needs culture, and ultimately culture will eat strategy because strategy tells you what you're doing, but culture tells you why and how you're doing it. And perhaps the greatest or the most accessible example of this is Apple. Apple has become part of popular culture. We have a relationship with Apple even if we don't own anything that is an Apple product. So we have this non-physical and this physical approach to dealing with a concept, with an idea. Again, we think that there's a move in the market away from a transactional base to the way that we purchase things into a more relationship-based dynamic. And again, an easy example of this is when you buy a car, you get a user's guide, you get rules about how to do this, how to preserve your product, and you're left with a sense that you're not quite remote from mothership. You have this care that is coming from the car manufacturer. And I think that this is an important element in moving forward and how we can bring that sense of care, those sense of relationships into the design of buildings and in particular residential accommodation. So how do we do this? We do this by triangulating three very important things. We need to understand and we need to create the relationships that will be meaningful and relevant to the project and to the design process and ultimately to the sustained existence of whatever it may be. So there's an awful lot of understanding of the customer. This is not just market analysis. This is understanding the customer and where the customer might be going and how to engage with that customer, and it's backed up with all the data analytics that you can find out there. We also need to test method relationships. This is the hard stuff. This is the cost constraints. This is the program time and quality issues. This is buildability. This is how do we bring all that kind of stuff together. And we triangulate that then with how do we forge a relationship between the market or our customers and the methodologies and the constructabilities and the design of whatever the project might be. In essence, what we're starting to do here is to build the culture of a project. And culture really is a very similar thing in our mind to the brand. And so typically at that point, we would create a brand guide. And a brand guide is the collection of triangulated ideas that can be used as a filter mechanism for all future ideas in the project itself. They may be design related, technical, they may be marketing. And it's the first physical manifestation of the building. To give you a very sort of current example of how we would build a brand or how this brand might work in a PRS or build-to-rent setting, we need to understand what those buildings are about, what that sort of purpose-designed piece of architecture might be needing to do. We need to create me space, which is where I'm going to dwell. I'm going to have we space, which is where I'm going to interact. There's a front of house and a back of house. And each of those are going to be supported by much more kind of more critical and complex set of relationships, ranging from management to construction to cost and everything else. But if every one of those items can be assessed in the context of the brand objectives, so that they themselves create objectives, meaningful objectives, which support all the other objectives within the project, we will start to get closer to understanding what we're dealing with. And in PRS, I would argue, you're dealing with of having to design the customer experience and starting your entire design process from the perspective of the customer experience and then working from that position. And forming that into some type of a branded idea is certainly going to help that process. So how do we gather this? Well, we go to sites like this. We call this the imagination economy. It tells us an awful lot about what people are thinking. But what it also does is it gives us an opportunity to talk to the people who are in those spaces. So you could set up a project, a Pinterest folder to talk about your project, and you start to get an engagement with people before you've even started to design it. You look at some of the ideas they may have for their interiors or things that they are focused on. And it's really quite a powerful and extremely easy thing to do. The social media side of things, well, you can get burnt in a moment on Twitter. And we think for things like PRS, we're going to get into a TripAdvisor type of approach. If it is about customer experience, and you go to PRS developer or building X and you have a bad service experience, you're going to give it a 1-star rating. And so suddenly your brand, your building, your entire business model may be very vulnerable to people making very snap decisions about how it's delivered. And that goes back to how you started in the first place. It all links through, and we need to use this sort of media in a very intelligent, careful way. So here are a few ideas about how we present a branded idea, a branded solution. In this case, it was for a client who had fairly traditional a product that he wanted to bring to market, which is a range of houses. And we spent a lot of time dealing, in this case, very specifically with the architecture. We talk about, we have a concept, we have a thing that we call brand critical items. So there's things that need to be in the building because it's that sort of a building, in this case housing, but there are certain brand critical items that will pull the brand ideas through and into the building. And ultimately we come up with a series of statements or concept words that we use to filter each and every question or design question that we may have. And we ask them to sign this off as part of the process of design delivery. Here's another extract from a branding and design guide that we've created where we've gone more into experimenting with layouts. But essentially, what we're doing with this is explaining why and how every element is relevant to the design or relevant to this part of the building or relevant to the project more generally. It's not just about the strategy, the design strategy or the look and the feel, it's about how every element supports the overall culture of the project. Where appropriate, we'll use things like depth mapping, which you can just bombard into a building once you've got some sense of what it might be, and you'll get data that can inform movements and visibility areas, and that may allow you to locate things. But all the time, we see a role for data in design. And we've taken a particular view on the use of BIM. We have what we call soft BIM and hard BIM. Soft BIM is an incredibly democratizing process. It's incredibly empowering. Gone are the days where you'll go to a sales office if you're going to buy a house or a flat and be given a plan. We are doing it right now. We will load a mini BIM model of the building or the apartment with the drawings, with CGIs, and you'll be able to use it on your iPhone. I have one loaded on right now, and you can play on that on your way home in the train or in the bus and really start to experience that building even before it's built. And you can link that to your Pinterest account and start bombing your ideas into that, and people start to have fun. It's a wonder. It's been an amazing, amazingly powerful communication tool for us. We've heard a lot of talk about BIM already, and this is the harder side of it, which is the technical coordination and the stress testing of the proposition and the deliverability of it. And of course, BIM has a massive role in stitching the building together, but it can also be created with reference to the brand, so that everybody understands why certain things are important and how that needs to filter into even the most technical aspects of the design. So at the end of something, we would expect and hope to produce a design and brand guide that we can use to tell the story of the development. It can go to planners, it can go to all sorts of interested stakeholders to tell the story of what you're proposing. And the question really is, why brand? What we've really done is we've used technology to communicate, and that's important, but what we've done is shifted around the sequence. Traditionally, you start to have a relationship with a building once it's there. We need it to be built. But if we approach this differently and we use technology in an effective way, we can start to establish a relationship and communication and a culture of the project, of the building, long before it even exists. And we can use the feedback from that to inform the development of the design or inform the placemaking or whatever the case may be. It's a very useful process. And in the end, we'll have better projects, we'll have better architecture, better defined products and services, and a much better customer experience. All in all, I think we'll get to a better project because there will be better understanding. And we need to look at branding as an empowering device. It talks to identity and character and influence. It's not just about soft side stuff. It's not just about outreach to people, although that's really, really important. It's also really, really important to define the hard stuff, the value, the viability, the construction cost, the sequencing. Are we going to go MMC or are we going to go traditional? All of this can be contained and experimented with and defined before we start to build. So we would always advocate that we design the brand before we design the building.
Thank you, Brendan. Brendan, it is certainly an interesting area around branding. I suppose, do you think that we would do better if, for instance, we had brands in the same way that maybe the Apple House or the John Lewis development? I mean, would it give people more security about the kind of products we're trying to sell?
I think it certainly helped to set expectation levels, and in some ways that's already happening. Perhaps not so much with the superstructure of the house themselves, but certainly with the things that are going in it.
I mean, one of the issues perhaps also is, at the moment we are very much focused on what we're building, the infrastructure we're building, the housing we're building. We're focused on the building of stuff rather than customers. That has to change.
I think so. I mean, many of the previous speakers spoke about needing to change culture because culture changes habits. And I think that it really is about getting a different culture, or allowing a different culture to emerge, which is a little bit more inclusive and the influence of the customer coming through much more directly.
Brendan, thanks very much for sharing your thoughts with us this morning. It's a big area. Do pick up with Brendan afterwards and drill into a little bit more depth. So, Brendan Geraghty, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.